te he mauri ora. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ngā mihi aroha ki a koutou, o tō karangatanga ki a hau i tēnei rā. Nā reira, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Yeah, the PowerPoint one, thanks. That's it. Cool. Okay, well, I was last in my class at school. And like you, I think the counsellors didn't know what to do with me, and I ended up as a teacher trainee, Wellington Teachers College, in the early 70s, mid-70s. I think they thought I'd be all right because they didn't have exams, but it was actually one of the last liberal educations, and it's a point I'd like to come back to. But I thought all I'd do today was tell you about what's going on in the world of DNA, what the challenges we're facing and what implications they might have for you. But I did think by way of context I should perhaps explain that after having taught for a while and through a circuitous route, mainly because of nepotism, I ended up as one of 4 owners of a little furniture company. And being in their eyes, least qualified, they were engineers and accountants and so on, and having therefore the shortest straw, I got the design job. It's a place, home for misfits as it was in those days. But we were lucky enough and persistent enough and arrogant enough and stupid enough to do quite well and take some raw intellect and some courage to create. And the point that I left, end of the century basically, that thing there was a design model at that stage, complete concept. It's now gone on to be, luckily enough, one of the sort of biggest selling office chairs in the world. Clicked over about 1 million units a couple of years ago. And it's something I'm enormously proud of, having had something to do with that it's amongst that elite group of chairs, maybe 20 or so of them, they basically all come from Germany or the States, except for this guy. And I think it's quite an extraordinary achievement back then. Since then, I've been running DNA. And DNA is a 22-year-old, it was a graphic design consultancy. It's now morphed into something different. And I thought I'd tell you about that. But that's not us. But if you're old enough, you might, maybe no, none of you actually look old enough, but any ideas who that is? It's a very young Rod Stewart in the middle. It's a small face. It's very good. Can you say that for me in your beautiful accent? Because that's how it was said.
Hello, Mrs. Jones. How's your birds lumbago? It's from a song, isn't it?
It's from Lazy Sunday, 1967, I think. But and that for me is a representation of a thing that's going on in our little part of the world, the part of the world where organisations talk to their customers, to their consumers, to their community, if you like. And the image that portrayed for me was going into a local store where the store owner knew you intimately, and therefore could provide you with a sort of service which was personalised. There was a time pre-industrially when that was actually all there was local service. It was changed by Henry Ford, of course, industrial mass production, any colour you like, of course, being his wonderful mantra, as long as it was bloody old black. But mass manufacturing led to mass marketing, moving on from that pre-industrial age. And we got really clever last century and we learned about niches. We learned that not everyone was the same and that you could group them into smaller groups, not that much smaller groups, who were intended to be homogenous, and you could send them specific messages that were applicable just to them. It's very clever. But we're moving on from that, and it's quite a revolution. It's an extraordinary, an enormous change which has turned our industry entirely upside down in the last 10 or so years. Now this is one example. I don't know if any of you know the Air New Zealand Airpoints ferry. Anyone come across this person? She's amazing. Because you can just talk to her, Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and she will gift you Airpoints or something else. And you just tell her your story, you get involved, and she, every day she gives out Airpoints. It's essentially a loyalty scheme, but it's a new age loyalty scheme. It's one where there's essentially a personal relationship between you and whoever this provider is. In this case, a fairly large organisation. But we think that this is one example of a condition which we labelled a couple of years ago. And we've called it intimate commerce. And there's an essential sort of misalignment between those two words. They're an oxymoron, because commerce, as we've known to understand it, is not by any means intimate. But that's what's happening. We think that the niche of one, a viable niche of one, the ability for mass organisations to connect with their customers on a purely one-to-one basis, in real time, really personalised, is coming. It's not here yet, it's on its way, and we're moving ever towards that. So, commercial intimacy, intimate commerce, is the thing that we're dealing with. That's what's causing the revolution. There's a whole bunch of things that we see which are part of this trend. Self-service, the ability to get on the website and do all sorts of bloody things. You can pay your tax, you can customise this, you can buy that, you can get all these bits on here. That is something quite new, something quite extraordinary, and it's growing exponentially. Tax, for example, we're working with the IRD at the moment. Their goal is to get 95% of us, all of us except probably you four, doing all your tax online, every single transaction. It's extraordinary. Data collection, the amount of data that people have and are collecting about us is extraordinary, and it's growing exponentially. And they're collecting in all sorts of funny ways, but that's one of the things we look at, and the more that they've got that, the more they can then customise, tune, and offer whatever to you. It's based on your location, your habits, who you associate with, all sorts of stuff. That leads into customisation of offers and loyalty programs, as the Airpoint Sphere is an example of. But when you follow this through to its ultimate conclusion, loyalty programs will probably actually cease to exist, because the way a loyalty scheme works is a sort of adjunct to how you buy stuff. It'll probably actually become one and the same thing ultimately, where that whenever you're purchasing something, they'll know exactly it's you, they'll know exactly your history, they'll know what you're worth, what rewards you get, and it won't appear like a sort of bald mass one where you have your bronze, silver and gold level. Social media is the other thing, and perhaps the most potent change in here. And you can see organisations now, us, the museum, everyone is getting their presence into that space. A lot of us are treating it like old media, which it's not. It's not a forum for you to push your message, to say how wonderful you are and expect people to respond to you. But that's how a lot of us are treating it, I'd have to say. A lot of our customers certainly are. What it has the power to do is to turn that relationship completely on its head. And that what an organisation's brand, their reputation, will from here on in rely on is what the people in your Twitter network, your Facebook network, tell you about their experience of that service. That will be much more important to you, if you're of a certain generation, certain age group, much younger than me. That will be much more important to you than the advertisements they present to you, the brand stories they give you, and the other sort of superficial bullshit that goes out into that vein. And we're starting to see that happen. You start to see when someone does something stupid and they get dumped on, and the word goes around instantly. In the future, your brand, your reputation, the actual worth of your business will be very much determined by what those networks think of your real performance. Most of our clients, big corporates, are having incredible difficulty with that because they're not organised to operate that way. They're organised to tell you stories about themselves out of that department and do the business out of this department. They've added another department in the middle, the digital one, which sits nowhere, doesn't relate to that one that tells the good stories and doesn't relate to that one that does the work. And what they do out here is driven by the dollars, and what they do out here is driven by the brand. And they're finding, under this scenario, that it just doesn't bloody work. And they are floundering around trying to realign their organisations to get their web people to talk to their marketing people, to talk to their advertising people, to talk to their comms people, to talk to their... And it's quite extraordinary. You're now starting to see one solution in corporates is to add in a thing called a customer experience manager, because that's what they're saying. The experience the customer has is all that you in the end have. But they sit over there, and there's the marketing department and the comms department. So it's in a shakedown mode. It's quite interesting. Clearly technology is the other significant component behind this. And almost every month you see some new thing, some new application, some new system coming out, which is affecting and empowering and moving this in a different direction. Does that all make sense? Is that your experience? Okay. The only thing we've done is put it in that historical context and say, inevitably where it goes to is that we'll all be allowed to be and will expect to be treated as individuals. And it's quite interesting. There's a bunch of other things which are driving that. I mean, New Zealand's enormous demographic change. We're going through a sort of explosion. I think when I was at school, I think something like 80% of the kids in my class were like me, we were Pākehās, and that was it. Kids are entering school now, Pākehā are the minority on average across the country, and that's an enormous change in a lifetime. Technology clearly is another driver, but also, and it's not only the ethnicity of our demographic change, it's the whole generational change. The expectations of my kids, and God damn it, their kids, is radically different to what we were prepared to put up with. The other one is economics. I mean, the reality of New Zealand is that and it's what we expected, what my generation has had the luck to have, is a first world education. But what we have is a sort of third world economy, and the realities of that are about to hit us. And that will create a whole lot of pressure for organisations to do things differently, do things smarter. And that's quite a potent sort of mix driving this whole thing around treating your customers more with more respect, treating them much more individually, and living and dying on the actual performance rather than what your ad agency tells your customers you do. So for us, commercial intimacy rules. It is our reality. And we went public with this about a year ago, and it's sort of resonating enormously. And we're getting all sorts of people coming and say, oh, that makes so much sense. Now we can understand roughly where it's going. It can give us an idea of how we should do this, this, and this. Not that we know where it's going, we just know it will go somewhere. But the change is very rapid and it's sort of unpredictable outside of that general direction that it's much, much more personal. Okay. For us, just get a drink of water as well. I think that this is the big opportunity for design as a profession, because we have historically actually not done this. This is what design should do. But as a graphic design company, back in the 90s, we did annual reports and we designed people's logos, and that was about it. We were craftspeople, technicians, delivering up what they told us to do because they knew that's what they needed to do. There's a great certainty. You did this, you did this, you did this. You had your ad agency, your graphic design agency, your direct marketing agency, and they did their different bits. And we took the briefs, got very well paid for them, did them, sent them out. This new situation calls for an entirely different level of response. And we think that design is actually the silver bullet. It's the new approach to these challenging problems they have. Because at our best as designers, we are simply creative problem solvers. Not analytical, not numbers-based problem solvers, but creative problem solvers. For years, I've said and thought that there are three foundations to what a designer brings to the world. One is empathy, the ability to see things from the other person's perspective, from the other side, And sometimes that's instinctive, but at its best it's well-grounded, researched and insightful. The second foundation we think is clearly innovation. The ability to think through, think around and over constraints that would stymie less creative professions. And finally, there's craft. Whatever the craft is, whether that be in architecture or interior designs or graphics or digital or whatever. And that the mistake we've made, particularly the graphics and digital end of the design profession, is to simply be just this one, or allow ourselves to be seen as just this one. The thing about creative problem solving, though, is that it's unlike craft, which is often a solo and focused and intense knowledge and skill-based thing. Creative problem solving is at its best collaborative. It's quite a different approach. And there's a bunch of stuff out there at the moment in our profession, all of which have the same theme to them, that it's about a bunch of diverse individuals together within a process roughly bounded by design principles that is there to solve a problem. Agile, I don't know whether you've come across Agile. It's a buzzword in digital design. And it's simply a collaborative and iterative approach to solving a problem. It's grown out of the lean movement, lean manufacturing. When I was doing it in the 80s, it was called total quality management. Grew out of the Japanese car industry. And Agile is perhaps a hyper-powered version of that, which in the digital space, when you're designing websites or whatever, allows you to, and what they do is they break things down into sprints, several little sprints, often 2 weeks long. And the aim is that at the end of each sprint, you produce something that can work. And then you, in the next sprint, add something else to it or make it better. And then in the next sprint, you do that again, and you do that again, and you do that again. So that rather than spending all of your time coming up with something and then finding out whether it works, you put something up, test it, innovate it, and repeatedly do it on. So you'll have a team of diverse professionals, cross-functional team working together, side by side, solving a defined problem in a fixed time. And whatever they've got at the end of that 2 weeks, whatever the sprint is, it goes live. In the next 2 weeks, you do whatever is the next best thing to do. And what's the next best thing to do is decided only at the beginning of each sprint. And that's quite a... In the digital space, it's very fast. But when I think back to developing furniture, it's not very different to the approach we took back then. Bunch of diverse practitioners, engineers and designers, getting engineers and designers to talk together, foreign languages and quite different cultures, but getting them to collaborate is in essence the same approach that you take here. Developers, designers, whatever, bringing that diverse view to the table. Ideation. Ideation is a very similar thing, made famous by an American company called IDEO. It's one of the ghastly words that we tend to create, but it's essentially that collaborative idea creation process. There's a couple of new disciplines which have spun out of this. Interaction design, the whole design of the digital interface, and there's huge bodies of practice developing around the nuances of that. And service design, another really interesting one, which is where you take an entire operation, if you like, the IRD case. How do you do things differently so 95% of people go to your website rather than send you a letter or ring you up? And you essentially map that whole thing. What are all the steps along the way? What happens at the various interface points between the people who are talking to you as a customer and who you're talking to? How does that feel for those people? Why does it and doesn't it work? What are the leak points? And how can you improve that? How can you come up with creative ideas to make that little bit work? You simply map the whole thing, rank where the biggest leak points are, figure out what you do about them, and then and only then do you do something. But these sorts of assignments are what DNA, this little graphic design company, now gets. And that's the enormous change for us, is that we can no longer be, I think, defined as any of the types of design organisations that in that old secure world, before intimate commerce bugged everything up, existed, and everyone knew where they fitted. Advertising agencies over there, above the line, others down here, below the line. It's a pejorative term, I think, but we've all lived with it. And interestingly, in our organisation, there's 50-odd people, I think. Half of those are trained designers in one stream or another, but only half of those actually work in what you would consider to be a design craft anymore. The actual thing is that everyone in our organisation is a designer in one way, shape or form, because when we're in that room working together on a particular project, we're all equal parts of solving the problem. And that's another quite different thing. You go into Saatchi's today, they have reception in the middle, to the left are the suits, and to the right are the creatives. Ha! We know that creativity sits right across that whole building, and that the only way it truly works is when you actually put them in the same space, almost in the same sprint, working on the same problem together. That diversity of view that's powerful. So that's what's happening in our world, and it's very challenging. It's incredibly exciting, and it takes a hell of a toll on a CEO, I can tell you. When I started to think, going way back to my educational roots, as to what that might mean for you guys, and it seems to me that these delineations around craft are increasingly unhelpful. We find it very, very difficult to make use of design graduates at all. And, you know, maybe that you have to be realistic and say that graduates can't be expected in any profession to come in and work from day one. But you look at accounting agencies, Deloitte's and so on, their whole business is built on graduates. The average age of people at one of the big four, I can't remember what number it is 27. The average age is 27. And you've got the average age of 27, and they're charging on average $450 an hour for those services. And you put that maths together, and it says, you know that when you're hiring accountants, you're getting graduates doing the work and getting paid very well for it. In our field, we find that impossible to do, because graduates seem to be so captivated and captured and limited by the craft delineation, the delivery of the end product, that they haven't yet. It takes time, it takes experience, it takes maturity, and it takes, and often for them, a sort of 180 switch around the head. Oh, shit, my job isn't drawing that. My job is thinking about what we should draw. And so we find it really difficult to take graduates, which means our costs are really high, which is another reason this business is quite difficult. But I think that whole idea of creative problem solving is the essence. And within that, collaboration is the critical thing. Teaching creative thinkers, whether they be trained designers or not, to work together within a process where all of the inputs are valued, but there's a ranking order, a way that works, which takes the ego and the politics and the power out of it, is a really critical component of it. Years ago, I had the privilege of going to a wonderful design school in Paris called Les Ateliers, which I checked this morning. It's still going. It's on the web. It's amazing. But I was there in the late 80s, and their view back then was that they're not creating designers to be designers. They're creating designers to be great citizens of the world. And they had an individual course designed for each individual based on 2 semesters a year. Each one was based around a collaborative project and international fieldwork, which was often aid-based. And the idea is that their graduates might end up being designers, but they would certainly end up being change agents for positive good somewhere around the world. And I think that's a really sort of uplifting and enlivening view about what design at its best can be. And in our small way, in our little corner of the world, in our little corner of that world, the world where organisations speak to each other, we're trying to do something similar. And it's bloody good fun. So, thank you.